I'll be looking at those and mixing them with questions that are coming in on your 3x5 cards to the mic assistants who will read those questions. If you're having trouble out in the Zoom audience of any kind, a frozen screen or something like that, as you know by now, you can usually just leave and come back in using the same link that you came in originally, and that'll usually take care of it. There is a phone number on the message you got with the link to come on to Zoom. If that doesn't work, you could call that and see if you can get some assistance that way from the Ollie office with any technical problems. Uh, Professor Cross will be selling and signing books this morning after the Q&A out in the atrium. So if you have some interest in that, that will begin pretty quickly after he's done with the Q&A. I have a number of things. We're kind of at the end of our normal programming, if you want to call it that, at Ollie. A couple things, 3 or 4 things coming up here I want to just quickly mention to you. There are 2 out-of-town trips that are still open, not full yet. One is to the Meyer Gardens and Sculpture Park in Grand Rapids on June the 18th, an out-of-town trip. And also a cruise on the Detroit Princess Riverboat on the Detroit River on July 11th. Both those are still open on the website to sign up for. Also, 2 usual Ollie events at this time of year coming up. On June 5th, we have the Big Hearts, largest fundraising event for Ollie on June 5th, and then the picnic on June 12th. And last but not least, there is a trip to the Tigers game with the San Francisco Giants on May 28th. You have 2 options to sign up for that. There are still openings. One is where you get the bus trip down and back from Ann Arbor, as well as a lunch at the stadium and tickets for the game. Or you can just get yourself to the America Park, but do the lunch and the ticket. 2 different options there you can see on the Ollie website. That's coming up on May 28th. I have an obligatory thing to mention here, as we always have to read off a disclaimer. The views expressed by the presenter are not necessarily the views of the University of Michigan or the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. It's my pleasure now to turn the podium over to Jerry Gardner, who is the host coming from the committee that sets up the Gorgie series each year. And Jerry, the podium is yours to introduce our speaker.
That's great. Today's speaker, Professor Ethan Kross, may look familiar to some of you. He gave an excellent Ollie lecture a few years ago on the psychological impacts of social media use. Ethan F. Kross is University of Michigan Professor of Psychology and Chair of the Social Psychology area. He's Director of the Self-Control and Emotion Laboratory. In addition, he's a Professor of Management and Organizations in U of M's Ross Business School, as well as faculty lead of innovation at Michigan Medicine's Eisenberg Depression Center. Professor Kross received a bachelor's degree from the University of Pennsylvania and a PhD from Columbia University. He was a postdoctoral research fellow in social and affective neuroscience at Columbia. Professor Kross's research examines how people can control their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors to improve their lives. He uses a variety of behavioral and physiological research tools, focusing on adults, children, and clinical populations. Professor Kross received U of M's John A. Swets Award for Excellence in Collaborative Research, its John Dewey Award, and several others. His research has been published in Science, New England Journal of Medicine, and the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, many other journals. His work has been covered in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, New Yorker, Harvard Business Review, The Economist, The Atlantic, Forbes, and Time. Cross is author of the best-selling book, Chatter, The Voice in Our Head, Why It Matters, and How to Harness It, which has been translated into 40 languages and chosen as one of the best books of the year by USA Today, The Washington Post, and CNN. In today's presentation, he'll be talking about his new and latest book. Welcome to OLLI, once again, Professor Cross.
Is that working? Can you hear me in the back?
All right, great. Well, it's a delight to be here with you. I think the last time was I don't know, Jerry. Jerry has left, but I think it might have been pre-COVID, and it was just such a treat to get to speak to what I think of as the extended family, the hometown crew. And so thanks for having me back. What I want to talk to you about today is one of the biggest challenges I think we face as a species, which is the challenge of how to manage our emotional lives. I've spent the last 25 years doing research on this topic, and recently wrote a book to distill the scientific findings for a more general audience, and wanted to just share some highlights with you today. Now, to get started, I thought I would tell you a story about this person over here. Her name is Dora Dumitro. When Dora was in her early 20s, in the early 1940s, she was growing up in a small town in eastern Poland, and the Nazis invaded. And in a very short order of time, her life went from being absolutely idyllic, small town gatherings, family, festivities, and so forth, to the worst kind of horror movie I think any of us could imagine. Her family was slaughtered. She very narrowly escaped that fate herself. Her boyfriend at the time managed to bribe a police officer who was overseeing a line that was constructed to send people to be killed. He bribed the officer, pulled her away, and they then fled and kept fleeing for the next 3 years. Ghetto, living in the woods, homeless for years. She ultimately, and her boyfriend, later husband, they managed to make it to this country, homeless, but then, like this wonderful immigrant story, managed to start anew, create a family, had kids, had grandkids, and I was her grandkid, her first one. And this person over here, Dora, my bubby, she was a hero to me. And I spent a tremendous amount of time with her growing up. Every day after school, in elementary school, I would go to her house when my parents were working, and she would ply me with food. It was actually an ingenious setup. So she was a master cook, and my grandfather was a master tailor. So she would just keep feeding me as my grandfather kind of like followed me around and let my pants out in the back even more as my waist line expanded. I do remember the pants, true story. And one of the things that I would want to talk to her about growing up was the war and her experiences. My parents had told me stories that they had heard about her experiences during the war, and I just wanted to know more, like, what happened? Why did you do this? How did you do that? How did you not let your feelings come out? Why did you run away? And every time I would ask these questions, she would respond by saying, "Don't ask why." She'd actually repeat this question, "Why is a crooked letter?" Is anyone familiar with that phrase? The idea is, it's just going to send you off in the wrong path. Go back to riding your bike, having fun, do your homework. How many of us here are parents and grandparents in the audience? Okay, most of you. So you probably know this to be true. A really good way to get your kids and grandkids to do something is to tell them not to do something, right? And that's exactly what happened to me. So my grandmother told me not to ask why. I proceeded to spend my life asking why questions about emotions and how people can manage them. And what I've learned, just to go back to the opening, is that this capacity to manage emotions effectively, both the everyday curveballs that life throws at us, as well as the bigger emotions, the bigger challenges, the sorts of which my grandmother endured, this is often the difference maker between a great life and a life that is filled with a lot more challenges. And I want to be clear that this conclusion I'm making, I'm going to show you data to support it, but anecdotally, it's not just my grandmother. I want to give you one other example. Anyone recognize these faces here? It's a local Ann Arbor family. They live a couple of doors, a couple of blocks away from me. This guy over here, his name is Matt Mosdem. You look at this family, you think this is just a happy, loving Midwestern family. But in fact, Matt and his wife Laura have a pretty remarkable history. So Matt was an undergrad here at Michigan. He played water polo. And when he graduated, he went on to become a Navy SEAL. After serving heroically in the SEALs for several years, he went back to Coronado and became a Navy SEAL instructor. So now his job was to not just execute missions, but to train the next generation. After serving as a BUDS instructor for several years, he moved on to Harvard, where he got his degree in leadership. This is already a pretty remarkable CV that is being amassed that makes me feel not so good about myself. But it gets better, because as Matt is finishing up his time at Harvard, he gets a call asking if he'd be willing to serve as the chief military aide for the president in the White House. This was during the Obama administration. Does anyone know what one of the chief responsibilities of the chief military aide for the president is? I think I heard someone say it's carrying the nuclear codes, right? So he's responsible for carrying the suitcase that could determine the fate of our planet, right? If things go sideways. This is someone who is exceptionally skilled at protecting himself physically and protecting other people. I saw the picture of this when he first sent it to me, and I said, Matt, where's the handcuffs? Aren't there handcuffs between, the wrist and that's what they do in the movies? And he goes, I don't need handcuffs. So enormous confidence here. And yet, when I've asked him about what is the secret to his remarkable success at all of these different phases of his life, he answers without hesitation, it is 90% neck up. So 90% of what he attributes to his success is not his physical conditioning, his knowledge of principles of self-defense. It's his knowledge of what I would call emotional jujitsu, his capacity to manage his own emotions and the emotions of the people around him, which is why I'm talking about this topic today. So before we get into what some of the data say about emotion regulation, I want to start with you, establish a common vocabulary, and start with this question over here. What is an emotion in the first place? All of you have been experiencing emotions throughout your lives, even before you were born. Current research suggests that unborn babies, like gestating, are experiencing emotions in the womb. No doubt some of you who have carried children have experienced the kick and the punch in the gut, right? Believed to be a source of discomfort, a result of discomfort for the baby. How many of you here would feel comfortable coming on stage right now and defining an emotion for everyone else? Jerry, you can't come here because you were in the field, so you don't count. But no hands are going up. This is remarkable. We're talking about an experience that you have had millions and millions of times, and you can't define it. You could define gravity. How often do you think about gravity versus emotions on a daily basis? But gravity is easy to define, emotions are not. Anyone want to venture a guess? No penalty for wrong answers. What is an emotion? Say it one more time. A feeling you act upon. Thank you for that. We're going to come back to feelings and how they differ from emotions in a little bit, if I don't remind me. Feelings are certainly parts of emotions. Yeah. A judgment. Okay, something cognitive. Yeah, orange jacket. That's pretty good. You could have come up here. You want to join me on stage for the rest? So emotions are, by the way, we got there pretty quicker than most audiences, so go blue. Um, Emotions are responses to events in the world or in our mind that we believe are meaningful to us. So they're situations or circumstances that have some importance. They are believed to be evolutionarily crafted, and vitally, we experience emotions for a reason. They help us, right? So we evolve the capacity to experience a range of different emotions because they load up these programs, as we just heard, to help us deal with the precise circumstances that we are in. So I am a proponent, of the belief that emotions are tools. They are tools that we evolve to possess to help us navigate the world. This is true not only of positive emotions, but negative emotions as well. Negative emotions, when triggered in the right proportions, not too intensely and not too long, actually provide us with an edge. And what I want to do next is just give you a couple of examples of how this works. And I'm going to ask for your participation here to help me do it. So let's just start off with some of the big negative emotions that we commonly talk about. Start with anger. When do we experience anger? Anyone want to guess? When do we experience anger? Anger occurs so when we feel threatened, when our view of what is right and wrong is transgressed, and there's an opportunity for us to do something about it. If that's the circumstance that reliably triggers anger. So I'll give you a somewhat benign example. I've got two daughters. When they were younger, each of them rode their bike without wearing their helmet. This is not how the Cross family operates. This was a violation of my understanding of what is right and wrong. You don't ride your bike without a helmet, and there's an opportunity for me to intervene to fix the situation. So when I register that circumstance, a program gets loaded up, and it's motivating me to approach the situation. Like, I'm very motivated to intervene now. My facial expression is contorted to express this emotion to my kid so that they know I'm angry. And the purpose of this is to prevent this from happening again. Right? So anger in that instance, as long as it's proportional, right? I'm not hitting someone, I'm not throwing things, I'm conveying that this isn't correct. This is a useful function. Let's talk about anxiety. This is everyone's favorite negative emotion. How on earth can anxiety be useful? What does anxiety get us to do? Prepare. I think of the worst presentations I've ever given. It's when I experienced no anxiety before. As a result, there was no cue that told me the night before, hey, maybe you should go over your slides and run through them. And yes, I did do that last night for all of you. So just to be clear. But I can specifically think of two instances where, for whatever reason, I didn't have any butterflies in my stomach. There was no anxiety before the event. I just showed up. I phoned it in. And you could tell. Right? So anxiety cues us to a potential threat in the future. And it motivates us to attend to that, but to zoom in really carefully to prepare ourselves for it. That's a useful function. Again, as long as it's not intense, too intense, or lasts too long. Let's talk about sadness as the last example. This is a little tricky. When do we experience sadness? When we've experienced some loss that we cannot replace. The loss of someone we love. Rejection. We get fired. When this happens, a program gets loaded up. It's called sadness. And what it does is it motivates us to kind of retreat a little bit to our own space, turn our attention inward, and start doing the hard introspective work to make new meaning out of our lives. Right? This person, this thing is gone. It was really important to me. I now need to make sense of who I am without this person or experience. And so that's what sadness does. But evolutionarily, we've learned that it can be a little dangerous to kind of retreat into a corner and just kind of dive into this negativity. So what does sadness also predispose us to do? We have this facial expression that we often display to others. It looks like this. My daughters are exceptionally skilled at displaying this facial expression strategically when I'm angry at them. And I will tell you, it is very powerful. It elicits an empathic response among those around us that beckons them to want to help us. So sadness is pulling us away, but also it's kind of throwing lifelines out there to say, hey, check up on me at times. So all of these negative emotions are useful when they are triggered in the right proportions. The big problem, though, is that they often are not. Now, these emotions we experience, they're not just helpful aids that we experience some of the time. I would argue that they are also central to what it means to be human. When you think about the times in your life that are most memorable, are they emotional times? See lots of head shaking. Think about it. You know, for some, it's Michigan's win against Ohio State. Also, emotional times are the many losses. Falling in love. The love that you now have for your partners, your kids, your grand. These are emotional experiences. The challenges of work, of school. We are a fundamentally human, emotional species. How fundamental, this is a study I love. 11,000 participants were text message, bless you, on their phone over the course of several weeks. And each time they were text messaged, the researchers asked them to indicate whether they were experiencing one of a number of several different emotions. What they found, 65,000 observations. Well, before I tell you, well, no, too late. This snuck up on me. People reported experiencing emotions more than 90% of the time. More than 90% of the time that we're awake, we are feeling something. Which goes back to the point I told you, I promised that I would address emotions and feelings. There is a difference between emotions and feelings, and it is as follows. The term emotion is an umbrella term. So when we experience emotions, it activates what we call a coordinated set of responses. There are things happening in our body. So our stomach is beginning to churn when we're experiencing anxiety. Cognitively, our emotions are hijacking the way we think. If it's anxiety, we're zooming in on something very narrowly. And then there's also this behavioral component to our emotions as well. So you can often see when someone's anxious, like they're clenching, you could see it in their face. And different emotions have different physiological, cognitive, and behavioral signatures. What a feeling is the conscious part of that response that we are aware of. So it's like when you have the flu, there are many things happening in your body that you have no conscious awareness of, right? Your immune system, your blood markers of immunity are proliferating. You're not aware of that. What you are aware of is the fever that's causing you to feel really warm. or the chills, right, that are going back and forth. That is the conscious part of an emotional response, and that is what we call our feelings. So we're feeling things quite a bit. Some of you may actually be feeling things in your sleep. How many people here experience emotions when they're sleeping? So, we are spending the majority of our time experiencing emotions. And yet no one here felt comfortable defining this at the start. I think that's a colossal failure of the educational system. Maybe we'll talk about that during the Q&A. So here's the big catch. These emotions we evolve to experience, they're useful a lot of the time, but they're also not useful a lot of the time. How many people here have experienced challenges of emotion regulation in their lives? How many people are experiencing them right now? Okay, some hands are going up. And when I say emotional regulation challenges, I'm not talking about the clinical variety here. That also, I know this based on statistics, have afflicted many of you here. I'm not just talking about clinical manifestations of anxiety and disorder. I'm talking about the curveballs that life is exceptionally adept at throwing at us, seemingly all the time. Some of those pitches we handle well, many of those we don't. Here is the data surrounding the consequences of our inability to manage our emotions well. If you read this table here, it's stunning. So what are the outcomes of associated with bad emotion regulation? The inability to turn the volume on our negative emotions down or shorten how long they last. Burnout, impaired decision-making, impoverished performance, anxiety and depression, loneliness, a lack of support and trust, reduced camaraderie, enhanced susceptibility to physical illness. These are things that we desperately try to avoid, and they are directly linked to the inability to manage our emotions according to science. Let's look at the flip side here. What happens when we manage our emotions well? Enhanced performance at work, improved decision-making, heightened engagement, creativity, social support, life satisfaction, empathy, improved physical health, and positive mood. So this capacity to manage our emotions is a real difference maker, is one way of summarizing this. Now the big question, of course, is how do you move from column A to column B? If you're not great at managing your emotions, how do you get better? Can you get better? Some people don't think it is possible to manage your emotions, to change your ability to do so. There's one survey, I talk about it in my new book. It polled adolescents. Approximately 40% of high school students did not think it was possible to manage their emotions. I fundamentally disagree with that assumption, and I'm going to explain why in the remaining time we have today. Before I do, though, I want to make clear this question of how we can manage our emotions. This is not a new question. We have been asking this question for likely as long as we have been roaming the planet in our present form. And we've gotten a lot better at figuring out how to do it. And I'll give you just a couple of examples of that. So if you turn back the clock 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, our ancestors invented what is widely believed to be the first surgical intervention. Anyone know what that one is? Shout it out one more time. Pulling a tooth. If only it were that benign. Here's a picture of the intervention. This is called trepanation. What it involved doing was carving holes in people's skulls, often while they were still alive. One of the reasons why this intervention was believed to be used was to help people do what? Manage their emotions. Think about it, right? 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, you have someone who is in a hysterical fit. They don't know what to do. Maybe they're experiencing panic. Maybe they are just withdrawing from the clan. They are catatonically depressed. Our theories of emotions were much different back then. Maybe this means that there's some spirit, some demon that's pulling the strings inside you, and so let's get it out. Let's get it out of you. So come over here, buckle up, and we make a little hole in your skull. This notion that bad emotion regulation was a function of things inside of you, imbalances, this has been a common theme. It still is in some ways to this day. Another manifestation of it, though, was bloodletting throughout the Middle Ages. So oftentimes when people weren't feeling good, they would go to typically a barber shop or a physician, and they would have some of their blood released because the blood was believed to carry toxins that were leading people to feel negatively and dysregulated. Now, as barbaric as some of this sounds, if we fast forward to the late 1940s, there was another giant spike on the emotion regulation timeline. A Portuguese physician invented a technique that was so widely heralded as an advance that it earned this physician the Nobel Prize in Medicine. I sense some of you know what this is. Anyone want to guess? That's it, lobotomy. So flip open the eyelid, take an ice pick shaped instrument and poke a few holes in people's frontal cortex. In case any of you are concerned, there will be no ice picks handed out after this lecture. But I mean, just pause for a moment here and consider the fact that emotion regulation or dysregulation was viewed as such a problem that a borderline barbaric technique was awarded the Nobel Prize at some point to solve it. That should frame the significance of what we're talking about here. So here's the really, really good news. No ice picks, no bloodletting, no trepanation today. Instead, what we're going to be talking about in our remaining time are a few sets of science-based tools that have been validated by science that can help people, that can help you manage your emotions if you want to. There are dozens of these tools that exist. One of the things I tried to do in my book was really bring all these different tools from different literatures together, talk about the science that underlies them to give them to people. And I like to organize these tools as falling into three buckets. There are tools you can use on your own, basic ways of shifting the way you think, act, or behave that can influence your emotional trajectory. There are also people tools, ways of interacting with other people that can either make your emotional experiences better or worse. That's a distinction that we often don't talk a lot about. We often think that other people in our lives are universal good when it comes to our emotions. They can be, but sometimes our well-intentioned friends and loved ones can actually put us on the wrong trajectory. And then there are even environmental tools, ways of interacting with your physical spaces that can make a big difference. And what I figured we would do today is just give you a taste of some of the individual tools that you can use just to introduce you to the wonderful variety that exists. And then I'll point you in some directions if you want to learn more. Are you guys ready to learn about some tools? All right, great. So I want to start with our senses. Sensation is the process through which we take in information from the world around us. So think sight, sound, touch, smell. These are all apparatus that we use to bring in information to help us understand the world we're in and how to navigate it. You could think of our senses as having like satellite dishes mounted all over your body to acquire this information. You're sensing things all the time, and you are taking it for granted because it is an incredibly potent emotion regulation tool that can be harnessed. And I'm going to give you an example of it here. So I want you to close your eyes. I'm going to just play a sound, and I want you to just listen to that sound.
Smoke down, girl. Living in a lonely world. He took the midnight train going anywhere.
Anyone feel anything while that song was playing? See some head shaking. What did you feel? Michigan football. So a memory, actually, a sense of nostalgia, connection to football. Yeah. Energy. Happy. How quickly would you say it took for those emotions to bubble up? Seconds. When you think of managing your emotions, do you often think it takes a lot of hard work and effort to rein them in? A lot of heads going up and down. And yet you're shifting here in a matter of seconds. How many people here have playlists that the moment they detect a negative emotion that they don't want to feel coming up, they instantly go to that playlist to push their emotion in a different direction? See 2 hands out of the entire group. This is an incredibly underutilized tool. Our senses are powerful shifters of emotion. How do I know this is an underutilized tool? So here's a study where people were asked, why do you listen to music? 95% of participants said, I listen to music because I like the way it makes me feel. People are recognizing that this is an emotion regulation tool. But if you then ask in other studies, hey, when you're experiencing anger or anxiety or sadness, what do you do to manage your feelings? Less than 30% of people report availing themselves of that modality to shift their emotions. Incredibly underutilized tool. Tremendous missed opportunity. Our senses are probably the most potent way of very, very quickly shifting your emotions in another direction. In a matter of seconds, sometimes even less, milliseconds. Now, listening to music is not going to solve our greatest problems in the world. But what listening to music or viewing a wonderful piece of art or smelling something fantastic can do is temporarily shift our emotional state, putting us in a position to engage with other tools as well. All our senses follow this basic principle. They can shift our emotion. Part of the reason why this is one of the ways sensation works is through emotion. You want to know if things around you are good or bad for you. So your senses and your emotions are inherently intertwined. Scent is a really powerful one. You may not know this, but many organizations are capitalizing on this feature of how you work without your awareness. You ever go to a hotel and find that it just smells amazing in there? Yeah, that's not an accident. They are piping particular scents through the ventilation system to create an emotional experience, a positive one that you associate with their brand, that you come back, you spend more. I was the victim of this firsthand. Several years ago, we went to a wonderful hotel in Chicago with my daughters and my wife, and we walk up to the reception, and my oldest daughter, she was, had to be maybe eight at the time, 8 or 9. She goes like, "Oh, Daddy, it smells so good in here. Can we live here?" Like, I don't think so if you want to go to college. But this is a lever that people are using to their benefit, and you can too. Like when I travel now, if I travel internationally and I walk through the duty-free shop in an airport, I don't see a duty-free shop. I see an emotion regulation emporium. Right? It's where all the perfumes and colognes are. We're spritzing ourselves all the time to change the way we feel about ourselves and to manipulate the way that others feel about us. I now feel bad that I didn't spray anything on myself today. But taste is another way of shifting us. Like pizza, favorite food, instant positive experience. Other things can push me in another direction. And touch, let's not forget touch. Affectionate touch is a potent emotion regulation intervention. When someone you care about is suffering, rubbing their shoulders, giving them a hug, this elicits an automatic release of stress-fighting chemicals that work to help people feel better. You just want to be judicious about not using this tool in the wrong context. So professionally, it can get us into trouble sometimes. So senses, a powerful tool. Let me shift to two others, and then we'll shift to the Q&A period here. Perspective. Sometimes we face things, and we just can't look away. We've gotta kind of muscle through the difficult times in life. In these circumstances, changing the way you think to change the way you feel can be an extraordinarily useful skill. There is, however, a problem with that tool. Just think differently about it. We're often told to do that. Several years ago, my wife and I were coming back from dinner in Detroit with another couple, very close friends. And the husband was experiencing some really stressful experiences at work with another colleague. And his wife said to him, just think differently about it. And he pauses, looks at her and says, yeah, easier effing said than done. Which I think characterizes most of our experiences, right? Like, it's not always easy to change the way you think about a really important problem. Get stuck in our own fixed view. When this happens, tools exist that you can use to help extract you from the situation, to help you look at things from afar, to shift your perspective. That can be really useful. And some of these tools are somewhat counterintuitive. So I want to share one of these tools with you right now, and I will share it with this person over here. So this is Malala Yousafzai. Many of you are probably familiar with her. She is the youngest person to ever win the Nobel Peace Prize. She was an advocate for the right of young girls to receive an education in a Taliban-controlled region of Pakistan when she was growing up. The Taliban discovered the advocacy work she was doing, and they didn't just plot to kill her, they followed through with that plot. So she's taking a bus home from school one day, an assassin boards the bus, shoots her in the face. He goes on to make a miraculous recovery, continues her advocacy work, and wins the Nobel Prize. Just around that time, when she won that wonderful honor, she was invited on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart to talk about her experience. And I have a brief clip here that I want to play for you from that interview. What I'd like you to do is just listen to how she uses language to talk about what was going through her mind.
When did you realize the Taliban had made you a target?
When in 2012, I was with my father and someone came and she told us that, have you seen on Google that if you search your name and the Taliban have threatened you? And I just could not believe it. I said, no, it's not true. And even after the threat, when we saw it, I was not worried about myself that much. I was worried about my father because we thought that the Taliban are not that much cruel that they would kill a child, because I was 14 at that time. But then later on, I used to I started thinking about that, and I used to think that the Talib would come and he would just kill me. But then I said, if he comes, what would you do, Malala? Then I would reply myself that, Malala, just take a shoe and hit him. But then I said, if you hit a Talib with your shoe, then there would be no difference between you and the Talib. You must not treat others that much with cruelty and that much harshly. You must fight others, but through peace and through dialogue and through education. Then I said, I'll tell him how important education is and that I even want education for your children as well. And I'll tell him, that's what I want to tell you. Now do what you want.
Anyone catch anything noticeable about how she talked about her experience there? Third person, that's right. Who said that? Okay, you got it. So she starts off talking about the experience, referring to herself in the way we typically do in the first person. You know, I used to think, what would I do if the Taliban would come and get me? And then the moment she she gets to what is arguably the most fearful, anxiety inducing moment any of us can contemplate, a well equipped terrorist coming to kill us, she starts changing the way she uses words to refer to herself. She starts using her own name and the word you. I used to think, what would you do, Malala? And then I would reply and say, just take a shoe and hit him. She's giving herself advice like she would someone else. We call this distanced self-talk. What it involves doing is using your own name and you to silently coach yourself through a problem. The silent part is important. You don't want to go around Main Street talking to yourself out loud with your own name. This violates social norms. And it can be a very powerful tool for shifting people's perspectives. The reason why this tool works, and I should give you the disclaimer here, everything I'm talking to you about here is grounded in science. So this is all science-backed tools. The reason why this works is we are much better at giving advice to other people than we are taking that advice ourselves. Does this resonate with folks here? You can tell people to do things. You don't follow the same advice yourself. In other words, you are all giant hypocrites. Yeah? Okay, there's a name for that phenomenon. It's actually called Solomon's paradox. It's named after the Bible's King Solomon. What is King Solomon well known for? Being one of the wisest people in history. Would travel the world over to get his counsel. Yet if you look at his own life, he made a slew of terrible decisions that ultimately contributed to his kingdom's demise. So this is my, by the way, ace in the hole. If anyone ever asks me whether I personally sometimes stumble to manage my emotions, say, Solomon's paradox, I can give good advice. I don't always take it. Distant self-talk plays on this mechanism. When you use your name and you to try to work through a problem you're experiencing, it shifts your perspective. Because most of the time that we use those words when we think about and refer to someone else. So when you use the word you to refer to yourself, it's like you're talking to another person. It makes it much easier for us to wisely work through our problems. Mental time travel. This is another powerful perspective shifting set of tools. And there are two ways that this works. I want to walk you through each one really quick. How many people here have heard that you should try to be in the moment as much as possible? Okay, a lot of you. There's nothing wrong with being in the moment. It can be very helpful. But what I like to remind audiences of is you can't always be in the moment. If that's your goal, good luck, because the brain evolves to allow us to travel in time in our minds. And this is actually an invaluable capacity that can help us manage our emotions. There's a lot of richness that comes from mental time travel. Who here is fond of fantasizing about future positive experiences, vacations, other things like that? What about going back in time to savor the wonderful experiences in life? Right? I see lots of hands going up. What about going back in time to learn about our screw-ups? I screw up on a regular basis. I wish I didn't, but I do. I jump into my mental time travel machine to try to figure out, hey, why did that happen? What could I do differently moving forward? We also use our mind, mental time travel, to plan for the future so that we don't screw up. So this ability to travel in time in your mind is a really useful attribute. And it can also be harnessed to help you manage your emotions. And so two ways you could do so. One involves time traveling into the future. So what this looks like is, let's say you're struggling with a problem. Feels really big and suffocating. Think about how are you going to feel about this next week, next month, next year. You have lived through millions of emotional experiences in your life, and most of them follow a particular trajectory. The emotion is triggered, and then as time goes on, the intensity of that experience eventually fades. We often lose sight of that when we are in the midst of experiencing a big emotion. jumping into the mental time travel machine and asking yourself, how am I going to feel about this next week, next month, next year? It highlights the fact that what you are experiencing is temporary. It will eventually fade, and that can turn the volume on our negative emotions down. So that's mental time travel into the future. We can also mental time travel into the past. This works a little bit differently. This is what I often do with my grandmother. So one of my most powerful personal tools for when I'm struggling with something is I jump into my mental time travel machine. I set it for 1942. I get out in Eastern Poland, and I spend some time with my grandmother and grandfather as they're running away from the Nazis in the frozen Polish woods. I do not have to spend a lot of time with my grandmother there to recognize that what I am dealing with right now pales in comparison to what they endured. They got through that. I can get through this. I think we all have, if not personal experiences like this that we can anchor on. We know people who have those experiences, or there are experiences from our broader culture that we could cling to help us broaden our perspective. It's another powerful tool. Let me wrap up by telling you about one more category of tools, and then we'll go to Q&A. And this involves attention. Think of attention as your mental spotlight. It's where you are focusing. You focus on stuff that's bothering you, it brings it to your awareness and tends to perpetuate a negative response. You focus away, that can, at least temporarily, alleviate the negative response. Now, we often hear that we should never focus away. Don't avoid the bad stuff in life, because it'll just come back to haunt you. I want to interrogate that assumption to close. And to do so, I want to first share with you a clip here to highlight the role that attention can play in our emotional lives. The clip comes from an experiment called the marshmallow test. Is anyone familiar with the marshmallow test? Okay, we have a couple of hands going up. So Walter Mischel happened to be my advisor. He was the inventor of this test. And essentially what it involved doing is you bring kids into the lab and you sit them down at a table, and in front of them are typically two treats that you've determined ahead of time they desperately want to consume. Pretzels, cookies, marshmallows, whatever it may be. And you basically present them with a choice. So an experimenter tells a child, I have to leave the room for a little while. If you can wait till I come back, you can have both of these treats. On the other hand, if you really want, you can have one of the treats whenever you want. Just ring this bell and take the one treat. But you can't have two unless you wait until I come back. Now, this is about as challenging a situation as you can put a 3 to 5-year-old in, because they all desperately want both treats. And the question is, how do they navigate that emotional tension while they wait for the experimenter to return? So I have footage here from one of the original studies that was performed with this task. What I'd like you to do is just watch the kids as they go through the task and just look at what are they doing to manage the frustration. That child is currently serving a life sentence. All right. So cute, huh? What did you notice the kids doing? Distraction, right? They were looking away, and maybe looking it back again, but they were taking some breaks. There's been a lot of research on attention and how it impacts our ability to manage our emotions. Here's what we have learned. Chronically avoiding things is not good. So if you have a decision rule where anytime something really bad happens, you're just going to distract yourself chronically, suppress it, push it away, try not to think about it. There are tons of data linking that approach to negative outcomes. The problem is, we've gone from that observation, this extreme behavior where you just avoid endlessly, to assuming that all forms of avoidance are bad, to assuming that you have to choose between you can either approach or avoid. You can't do both. That is not, in fact, true. What we can also do is we can be flexible with how we deploy our attention. And research shows that being flexible, taking some time away from a problem, and then coming back to it a few hours or days later, can be an incredibly useful tactic for managing emotions. Has anyone here ever regretted responding to the annoying email right away? That is an example of where approaching the problem right away doesn't do us good. I cannot tell you how much I have often benefited from putting the problem aside for a half day, coming back to it later, and I approach it from an entirely new perspective. So when you hear that you should never avoid things, think critically about that. What I would encourage you to do is think about how to be flexible with your attention, moving it back and forth, just like the most successful kids in the delay of gratification tasks often do. So the most successful kids, what they do is they take some time away, they focus again, they remind themselves on what they're waiting for, and then they focus away again. They go back and forth, back and forth. So let me just shift to wrapping up in the interest of time here. We've talked about 3 sets of tools: shifting your senses, perspective, and attention. And just to be clear, I've given you an example of 1 or 2 strategies for each of these different categories of tools. There are many, many more. I like to think of emotional regulation as a lot like physical fitness. There are lots of different exercises you could do in the gym to become physically fit. The same is true when it comes to our emotional lives. What we really need to do is start exposing ourselves to the different pieces of equipment, learning how to use them, and then figuring out how to fold those exercises into our lives. And there's an idiosyncratic component to how that works. If I were to poll all of you, I would imagine that many of you exercise regularly to meet your health goals, but there are lots of ways you achieve those goals. So we're really just beginning to scratch the surface here. If you check out my website, you could find lots of freely available descriptions of tools. They're of course described in my book as well. The challenge I'd love to leave you with is to find the tools that work best for you. Different tools work for different people in different situations, and then help other people do the same, because I assure you they're not getting exposed to this information in the way that you have this morning. So thanks so much for being a great audience, and I'll stick around now for some questions.
Yeah, let me remind both audiences, as I said at the very beginning, the 3x5 cards are in the hands of the two mic assistants, Bill and Francis, also a writing instrument they have. So if you don't have one of those cards coming in, ask them, and they'll give one to you, then you give it back to them, and they'll read your question to the speaker. On Zoom, a lot of times questions start to flow in once the presentation is over. I have some already here, but for the Zoom audience, just click on the Q&A icon and type in your question. I'll see it and try to work it into the flow here. No.
I have a
Bill, you have
question.
something?
Yeah, I have one of my own. Are older people better at controlling their emotions than younger people?
Yes.
That's
Next
what I-
question.
There's
Next
a lot
question.
more
There's actually
experience.
there's some wonderful data that should leave everyone here feeling good and gives folks in my age group some hope. So I'm 45, and I am at, if you look statistically, just across looking across people, I'm at the absolute bottom of happiness and well-being. I should be for my age. So so what you see happening is that happiness, it tends to dip down in middle age and then increase as you get older. And one of the reasons why we think that's true is because this is a very wise group. You've gotten a lot of different curveballs. You've learned how to manage them. You've survived. You're getting better at managing your emotions, finding purpose and meaning in life. Now, the caveat to that is if you get sick, physically sick, that can interfere with one's happiness and well-being. But you stay healthy, the data suggests that things look awfully good when you get older.
I'll take one from the Zoom audience over here. The question is, do you think artificial intelligence systems will develop emotions?
That's a great question. I think they could develop certain facets of emotional responses in the following sense. Let's say you have a robot that's AI powered. I gave you a couple of formulas for when we get anger or sadness, anxiety, anger. Your views of what's right and wrong is transgressed, and you can do something to intervene. That's a computation that, in theory, an AI-generated robot could certainly compute. And if it's a realistic-looking robot, it could contort its facial expression, it could intervene, so the motor behavior you might expect to accompany it, zooming in. So here we are meeting certain of the criteria for emotions. There, of course, is no physiological apparatus that underlies that emotional experience, though. So I think you'd want to, it's the province of philosophers and psychologists to speculate. Can you have an emotional experience in the absence of some of those components? But certainly I think we could get machines displaying emotions in particular situations or components of emotions. Great question.
Okay. Yeah, Bill, do you have another one?
What are your thoughts about sitting with uncomfortable feelings, a meditative practice, sitting with your demons?
So I'm a proponent of the belief that there are no one-size-fits-all solutions. Meditation works for some people and is a game changer, and if that's true for you, I think you should meditate, keep doing it. Other people don't respond as positively to meditation, and there are other tools that exist there. But in terms of the act of sitting with your emotions, tolerating distress is how we often refer to that. Meditation is one way of helping people do that. Learning to just accept the fact that you are going to deal with moments in your life that you don't have control over, and that they're going to hang around for a bit. Learning how to be more comfortable with tolerating that distress can be a very, very useful skill to cultivate. You don't have to use meditation to do it. There are other ways to do it as well, but it is an important tool to have in your toolbox.
You have another one, Bill?
A couple more. Any suggestions, I love this one, any suggestions to deal with white coat syndrome in the doctor's office that results in higher blood pressure readings?
Yeah, there's so in my first book, Chatter, I talked a bit about that phenomenon and how our expectations can very powerfully impact how we feel. Certainly, trying to change those expectations by repeatedly coming in contact with the situation, learning that these people are here to help you. You want to break that automatic response. And so there are certain ways of inoculating people against it that, if that's a serious concern, you could certainly work towards.
Bill, yeah.
Please tell us how this relates to the Ross School classes.
So I teach a class in Ross on managing yourself and interpersonal relationships. You can think of it as self-leadership. The challenges I spoke about today, these are universal human struggles. Do we have anyone here from the organizational domain? People who spent their time in companies working? Okay, not many. I assure you they are under stress often, just like the rest of us. And part of what makes them effective or ineffective is the ability to manage those emotions. And so it is, I think, a vital tool, and that's why we see such interest in it in the business domain.
Francis, do you have a question there now? From the audience?
Hold on a second. Okay, yeah, isn't using scent frowned upon socially, unacceptable these days due to allergies?
I haven't heard that. So, yeah, I think it probably depends. There may be some people in your group are more sensitive to that, and if so, you want to be conscientious. But I don't know of any social norms that govern that any differently than, you know, if we know someone who has a gluten allergy, we want to be cautious about serving bread and pasta at a dinner. You want to navigate around it.
One more.
Got another?
One more.
Yeah, go ahead, Francis.
Should we avoid reading or listening to news if it upsets us?
Say that one more time. Say that one more time. Should we, for news, should we keep doing it? Yeah, so great question. I think you want to dose your consumption of news. I certainly do that now. I used to check the news, you know, probably 20, 30 times a day. Every time I have a break, I go to New York Times or CNN. Sometimes I don't check for days. I want to stay informed. I don't want to be, you know, naive about what is happening in the world, but it serves no emotional good for me to constantly be exposing myself to the turbulence that currently characterizes.
Don't you think they do that on purpose? Let me rephrase that. Do you think they do that on purpose?
Yeah, I think they're trying to get negative emotional responses. You know, clickbait. They're absolutely trying to get people to look at the articles. And right now, there's a lot of aggravating news out there. So I would think that it'd be interesting to see what the traffic is like on websites nowadays. If people are just finding it, they're in. Well, let me ask all of you: how many people here find it? They can't not look. They're looking even more now. How many people are looking less? Okay, so it's about a split. I'm in the second camp.
I'm going to the Zoom audience here for the next question. Which emotions are the most difficult to control?
Totally depends on who you are. Like, we all have different triggers and different tools that we're effective in implementing. I think it's more about the intensity of the situation than the specific emotion itself. So big situations that arouse intense emotions are more challenging to control than the more benign ones.
Yeah, another one from the Zoom audience. How do you feel about the phrase, without stress, there is no growth?
I think it's a useful phrase that makes me feel better about things. I think that's an exaggeration. I think we learn plenty and grow plenty without stress. Having said that, we can certainly learn from mistakes, and those are often pivotal learning lessons that stand out loudest in our minds because we are tagging those situations as deeply meaningful because they were so emotionally arousing.
Bill, you have a question from the audience?
What changes have you seen in the last two generations at Ross and their coping skills or in their class interactions with the student body?
Well, I've only been at Ross 5 years, so I can't fully answer that question. I spent the first 3/4 of my career at Michigan solely in the psychology department in LSA, and then split my appointment with Ross about 5 years ago. What I can tell you is like notable shifts that I've seen just across the student body. One notable shift concerns attitudes towards social media and digital technology. In the very early 2010s, my group published a paper. I spoke to some of you about this a couple of years ago, pointing out how social media use predicted declines in well-being over time. At the time, that finding was viewed as heretical, and students were so positively disposed to Facebook and other platforms of that sort. They thought that this was a universal good. Nowadays, the culture has shifted dramatically. Students readily acknowledge that one of their greatest distractions and impediments to well-being is their over-reliance on social media platforms. So that's been one huge change, the attitude towards technology. Another big change is the openness with which students talk about their negative experiences and seek out support for them. It is now normative to talk about getting counseling or therapy for problems in a way that was in previous generations as taboo. I'll share one brief anecdote. When my youngest daughter was around like 5 or 6 years old, I was coaching her soccer team, and I saw that her shoelaces were untied in the middle of the game, so I motioned for her to come over to the sideline so I could tie her shoes. And she darts over to me. She's huffing and puffing. Daddy, I think I'm experiencing a panic attack. And I go, you're what? It's called you're out of breath. And I'm thinking to myself, I wasn't familiar with the term panic attack until I took my first clinical psychology class as a undergrad when I was 20 years old. And here this is already in her vocabulary. So I think this is really good news on the whole, because it means we may be soon getting to a point where an audience can define emotion and is as familiar with that concept as they are the principle of gravity. And I think that would be a really good thing for society.
Yeah, Bill, another question from this audience.
in the study of 5 to 8-year-olds, what has been found to be most important, nature or nurture? And does that ratio change with time?
So, nature tends to be more influential earlier on in life. And as experiences accumulate, you see nurture beginning to exert more powerful influences. What we have learned more recently, however, is it's actually not correct to view nature as existing in one box and nurture existing in another that never communicate with one another. We are increasingly learning, this is a field of epigenetics, that environmental experiences, nurture experiences, have implications for genes. So our experiences in the world can change the way our genes are expressed. You could think about this as we all have a piano inside of ourselves. Those pianos are our genes. And yeah, some of the pianos that each of us carry around are different, but our environmental experiences determine what combinations of genes get turned on versus off, gene expression. And so the two are inherently intertwined.
Okay, I'll go back to the Zoom audience then. The question is, are there major differences in people in terms of the strength of their emotional responses generally?
Oh yeah, there's individual, all of these, the efficacy of these different strategies and the triggers that elicit emotions, the reactivity, there's variability that characterizes all of those responses, which is in part what makes this question of how can people ideally manage their emotions so tricky to solve. I wish you all could come up to me after this presentation, tell me about the problem you are experiencing, and like a general practitioner, I could just diagnose, okay, do these 3 tools, call me in the morning, right? Do these 5 for these problems. We can't do that. No scientist I know can make that prescription because of the variability that exists. Different people are triggered to different degrees from different circumstances and benefit differently, different tools. So one of the things we're trying to figure out now in the lab is, can we identify certain profiles? These kinds of people in these kinds of situations benefit from these kinds of strategies. That's the big question that we now are trying to grapple with.
Another one from the Zoom audience. Is it possible to help someone, child or adult, learn to control their impulsivity?
Yes, there are a lot of the tools I talk about, I think, can be useful for helping people regulate impulses in a variety of different ways.
I can't help but think, sorry for interjecting something, as the moderator, the way stores align all kinds of sweet things and impulse buys if you go to the cash register.
Just look at this. Some simple things. So I don't have any notifications turned on my phone. If I saw a little red notification pop up with my email or text, I would impulsively want to check it. So notifications are off. That's one way of reducing my likelihood of behaving impulsively here. The other thing I do is during the presentation, I turn my phone over to further reduce what we would describe as the appetitive qualities of the phone. So I'm not looking at the screen. That would remind me of the email icon. And so, if you really, really want to be edgy with your impulsivity with technology, don't bring it somewhere. That will reduce impulsivity too.
Yeah. Another question from the Zoom audience. What is the best way to deal with a family member that is constantly angry, causes me anxiety and frustration to be with this family member? How do I deal with someone who's so angry?
Well, number one, you want to ideally broach that topic with them so that they are aware of how their actions are affecting others. And then you want to get them tools. I often try to break down emotion regulation as having 2 components. motivation and ability. Number one, you've got to be motivated to manage your emotions. Not motivated, you're not going to do it. If you are not motivated to get physically healthy and stay physically healthy, why on earth would you ever go to the gym? Right? It's painful in the gym for a lot of us, right? So you got to have motivation, but motivation itself is not enough. You also then need to have skills. Once you get to the gym, right, you need to know how to use the machines. And so if a person is flailing away emotionally, right, you want to figure out, are they motivated at all to manage those emotions? If not, you want to lift that. And do they have the skills to do so? And if not, you want to lift that.
Okay. Bill, do you have another question from the in-person audience?
Are epigenetics changes heritable?
It's a good question. I'm not sure of the answer to that question. Epigenetics is a relatively young field. There's a literature on generational trauma that would be relevant to look at, but I don't know definitively.
Would you define epigenetics?
Sure, epigenetics is how environmental influences impact gene expression.
Any more from the mic assistants? Okay. And I have asked the last one from the Zoom audience. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Well, thank you guys.
And remember, there will be a book signing the atrium as you depart here. It'll get organized shortly.